Shalom and welcome to Temple Talk. This is Yitzchak Reuven speaking to you from Jerusalem, Israel. Jerusalem, Israel's eternal, united, liberated capital, the place of the Holy Temple. Today is the 7th day of the month of Sivan, 5781. It's May 18th, 2021. This coming Shabbat, we read Parashat Nasso, the second Torah reading of the book of Numbers, beginning with Numbers 421, concluding with Numbers 781. Today is, as I mentioned, the 7th day of the month of Sivan, the day following Shavuot, the day following one of Israel's festival pilgrimages is always called Isru Chag. And actually, this next week, beginning with today and including up to the 12th day of the month of Sivan, are special days as well, because in temple times, being that Shavuot, unlike the other pilgrimage festivals of Passover and Sukkot, is only a one-day festival as opposed to a 7-day festival, many pilgrims who wanted to bring their first fruits and other offerings for Shavuot were not able to arrive on the day of Shavuot. So the offerings were accepted throughout the following week. So actually, in a manner of speaking, the one-day festival of Shavuot takes on an aspect of a full 7-day festival. And in fact, today, in commemoration of this, there are certain tefillot, certain prayers that we don't say in our daily prayers over the next 7 days. The same prayers that we don't say on other holidays, for example, throughout the 7 days of Passover, 7 days of Sukkot, and other days, there are certain prayers that we don't say in honor of these festive days. As you are probably aware, I love to talk about the Parsha. I love to talk about the Torah reading. I love to talk about the Holy Temple. I love to talk about spiritual things. And much less so about the politics of the day. However, today I'm going to make an exception. We are in, I believe it's the 8th day of this war with Hamas, which has fired, I think, well over 2,500 missiles into Israel over these past 8 days. And their war against Israel also inspired, or maybe it was pre-planned, basically an unleashing of Arab wrath inside of Israel. Pogroms were performed, were executed over the past week. Things have quieted down quite a bit since then, but it's not over yet. And Jews have been killed, synagogues have been set afire, and houses, Jewish homes, apartments have been firebombed and destroyed. Cars have been attacked on the road, and businesses, restaurants, hotels have been set afire and destroyed by Arab mobs. What's it all about? So I'd like to take the next bit of time to talk about what's going on, including what it's not about, even though there are claims that this is what it is about, and what is really happening here, as far as I can tell. The biggest ally that the Palestinians have, whether it's Hamas or whether it's the Palestinian Authority led by Abbas, the biggest allies they have are the gullible idiots in the West. I'm going to say that right off. The stupid people who have no idea what's going on, have no interest in what's going on, and who are basically motivated by hatred of the Jewish people, hatred of the Jewish state, and hatred of the God of Israel. You cannot separate any of those one from the other. If you hate Israel, you hate the God of Israel. If you hate the Jews around the world, you hate the God of Israel. So they are willing to be fed any poison that the Palestinian Authority or Hamas cooks up for them. Now, we're used to the lies and the accusations from Hamas and from the Palestinian Authority. This latest round, which began over a month ago, was the result of canceled elections inside the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas, otherwise known as Abu Mazen, the president of the Palestinian Authority, who was elected to a 4-year term 15 years ago, and he has yet to relinquish power, decided just before Biden took office, decided that he was going to call for elections in order to appease the Americans and his supporters in the West, the European Union. He's going to call elections to show that he's a Democrat, and this will appease him. Now, he didn't realize, perhaps at the time, that Joe Biden and his administration really doesn't give a damn if he has elections or not. They're going to support the Palestinian Authority come hell or high water, because that's what they're going to do. He didn't need to offer any goodwill gestures. Of course, offering elections is not like stopping to pay terrorists for slaying Jews, or stopping the incitement, or correcting and eliminating all the incitement to murder, which is in all the entire Palestinian Authority educational curriculum from preschool on up. None of those gestures, just the gesture of elections. When it became clear to him, soon after he announced these elections, that very few people actually believed would ever really occur, because it's not the first time he's announced elections and then canceled them. Soon after he announced them, not only did it become clear that Hamas, as it did last time they had elections in 2005, I think it was 2005, would be the winner, but his own party, his own terrorist organization, Fatah, which is the largest organization of the PLO and are the ones running the Palestinian Authority, they had factions within. They were going to challenge Abbas. So within his own Fatah, there were 3 or 4 different lists. So it became clear to him that he's going to lose big time. So he decided to cancel the elections, and of course he's going to blame Israel, because he claimed that Israel wasn't going to allow Palestinians in Jerusalem to vote. Fact of the matter is, the Palestinians in Jerusalem, last time they had an election, very few voted, and they didn't vote in Jerusalem. They vote outside of Jerusalem. Israel won't let them vote inside of Jerusalem. But anyway, it was an easy thing for him to accuse Israel of foiling his attempt to have elections. Okay, so the elections aren't going to happen. This upsets Hamas, who's expecting a big victory. So Hamas wants to challenge Abbas. So they're looking for reasons to take over. And of course, you don't do it directly by having a debate with Abbas. You don't do it directly by running a campaign. You do it by attacking Israel. So for the past month, they've been cooking up all these different factions, Abbas as well, because now he has to prove that he's maybe calling off the elections, but he's still the leader of the Palestinians, and he's still going to liberate them from Israel, etc., etc. By the way, nobody likes him. Palestinians hate him. He's corrupt. He's ineffective. He's a criminal, and they're tired of him. So one of the things they decided to cook up was this thing called Sheikh Jarrah. I'm sure you've heard about Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah is a small neighborhood in Jerusalem. It is just east of what used to be the dividing line between East and West Jerusalem until the 67 war, when Israel reunited Jerusalem. Now, Jerusalem was only divided in 1949 when after Israel declared its independence, Jordan illegally invaded and took over Judea, Samaria, decided to call it the West Bank, and also what was the eastern half of Jerusalem. This area called Sheikh Jarrah, known to the Jews as Shimon HaTzadik. Shimon HaTzadik was a Second Temple, a Kohen Gadol, high priest. And Tzaddik means a righteous man. He was a righteous man. There's many stories about him. We're not going to get into that right now, but he's buried there. his grave is there. So it's an important spot for Jews, and Jews lived in this neighborhood for decades and decades. In fact, Jews purchased land there. They purchased homes there. They have the deeds to this day. But when Jordan invaded East Jerusalem and evicted every Jew living in East Jerusalem, and there were thousands, many, many thousands, basically performing ethnic cleansing in East Jerusalem. He evicted the Jews, destroyed tens upon tens of synagogues, destroyed graves in the ancient cemetery on the Mount of Olives, and decided to give these Jewish homes in Sheikh Jarrah, as well as in Sowan. There's other places in Jerusalem where Jews have been working through the legal system to regain their land. Decided to turn them over to Arab tenants. Come 1967, Israel takes back this property in the Six-Day War and enacts a law, I believe in 1970, saying if you're a Jewish property owner and you lost your property because of the invasion by Jordan in 1949 and want to reclaim your property, if you have valid proof of ownership, you can take it to the court and fight your case, which is exactly what the owners of these buildings in Sheikh Jarrah did, beginning in the 1970s. In the 1970s, they began pursuing this in court. And it went back and forth. In fact, in the 1970s, the court said, listen, the Jews own the property. They have the proof right here. It was clear. And in fact, since then, there have been attempts by the Palestinians living there to show that someone else owned it, that an Arab owned it and sold it to them. And these proofs were thrown out because they really had no validity. You have to understand the Israeli legal system, when it comes to these property disputes, they don't favor Jews over Arabs. So many times Jews have been evicted from buildings that they believe they purchased legally. In this case, they were told, both sides were told in the 1970s by the court, try to work it out. So they worked it out. The Jewish owner said, if you pay rent, you can stay there. They never paid rent for 50 years. These families have never paid rent. It's the third generation now of these families. They have not yet paid rent. Whose decision was it not to pay rent? Their own? They're told by their leaders, don't pay rent. Don't agree to anything, because that might, recognize that Jews are human beings, that they have rights, that there's a law in the land. So it's been going through the legal system for 50 some odd years. Finally, recently, again, they were told, time is up. They can be evicted now. 4 families out of 28 Arab families in Sheikh Jarrah / Shimon HaTzadik were being evicted. Now, the Palestinians and their idiot supporters around the world will tell you that Israel is performing ethnic cleansing. This is the Judaization of Jerusalem. But you know what? Jerusalem's been Jewish for 3,000 years. 4 families out of 28. And there's one more appeal to the High Court in Israel. One more appeal. And unless the Palestinians, the Arabs living there, can pull something out of the hat, they're going to be evicted. This is how it works in the world, people. You don't pay your rent, you get evicted. United States, nobody waits for 50 years. You don't pay rent, you're evicted. Whatever your excuse is, you're evicted. I'm sorry. In this case, they should have been evicted 50 years ago. They're being evicted now. Okay, so this was an excuse, a red herring. Just let's blow this up. So they began having protests. And you have protests, violent protests, and the police come in. And then, of course, all coinciding with Ramadan, which has become a tradition in Israel for the Arabs to make the Temple Mount their cause. And, of course, for 100 years or more, every time Arab clerics, imams, or the head of the Palestinian Authority, or Hamas, or even in Jordan, which love to incite also in the Temple Mount, says, Al-Aqsa is in danger. Al-Aqsa, which is a mosque on the Temple Mount, is in danger of Jewish invasion, that Israel wants to destroy it. You know, you don't have to be too bright to know that this is a totally hollow claim. But you got this Pavlovian reaction for over 100 years. The Palestinians, the Arabs in the land of Israel just eat this up and they go berserk. So this is all very well planned. And of course, it's become a tradition in Israel on the Temple Mount during Ramadan, for the past week of Ramadan, for Arabs going up to the Temple Mount to bring rocks, to bring bottle rockets, to bring fireworks, to bring all sorts of incendiary devices in order to attack the police, who are barely present during these days, because Israel is so, I don't know what, Israel is so bending over backwards not to get anybody upset, not to upset the Arabs on the Temple Mount about anything. They have hardly any police presence. So the Arabs on the Temple Mount have to go looking for the police to attack them with rocks, with bottle rockets, with firecrackers. You saw it last week. They set a tree on fire. And then blame the Jews for having to be celebrating Jerusalem Day at the Kotel, at the Western Wall down below, at the same time. They set a tree on fire. They're going to destroy they're going to destroy Al-Aqsa themselves. That's how pathetic it is. So they go looking. So then the police have to come in to make order. And then they got exactly what they want, their cause celebre. They can tell the world now that the Jews, that Israel is not allowing them to worship. Israel is attacking them in the Temple Mount. Israel is breaking into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, Israel has a hand in this because pathetically Israel falls for this stupid ruse every year. How do they get up to the Temple Mount with rocks? Try putting rocks. We're not talking about little pebbles. We're talking about big rocks. Put them in your pocket. How do you bring them up? Is there no security around the Temple Mount? So yeah, Israel is an accomplice in this as well. We're just stupidly turning a blind eye to the violence and the incitement, and hoping it's going to pass without too much. Didn't happen this year. Sorry, guys. Okay, but none of these things, neither Sheikh Jarrah or Al-Aqsa, were the real reasons, as I pointed out, for any of the violence, for the rockets. But it did give Hamas the cause to challenge Abbas in the West Bank, Judah Samaria, by attacking Israel. They're going to defend Al-Aqsa. They're going to liberate Jerusalem. So they start firing thousands of rockets into Israel. Israel responds. Now, Israel responds by pinpointing terrorists and taking down buildings only after what they call knock on the roof. Israel will drop something, a big boom on the roof without any damage, and also make phone calls to the people in the buildings and say, we're going to bomb this building, we're going to take it down, leave. Now they bomb buildings where either Hamas has certain headquarters, certain facilities, or Hamas higher echelon are living or hiding out. They had a big fuss because AP offices and Al Jazeera offices were in a building that Israel took down. Everybody's very upset. You can't do that. You can't take down media offices. That's a war crime. Well, guess what? As if you didn't know, those same buildings housed Hamas headquarters. And they've admitted it. People in the media, people in AP have said, yeah, we knew about that. But of course, it doesn't matter what they admit. You've got your cause. And you got these idiots around the world, and you have these idiots in the Democratic Party. You know who they are, calling Israel all sorts of names, from apartheid state to terrorist, to this and this and this. You got a Biden administration that doesn't know its left foot from its right. I'll give him credit. He has supported Israel's right to defend itself repeatedly. You know, who knew if he would? And of course, he's taken the heat from his own Democratic Party, who has become so virulently anti-Israel in much of the party. And the people who are not anti-Israel, who are the leaders of the party, are afraid to stand up to these horrible people who've got just hatred And you know what? Anti-Semitism, that's what it is. Hatred of the Jews, hatred of Israel, hatred of the God of Israel. It's what it is. Hatred, 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 all around. So Israel is defending itself. Israel has destroyed many, many, many tens of kilometers of these tunnels that Hamas digs in order to attack Israel, in order to hide from Israel. When Israel responds, they've destroyed many, many, many miles of these tunnels and killing many terrorists who are hiding in the tunnels. Israel's wreaking a lot of destruction in Gaza. You have to know also that they say 1/3 of the missiles that Hamas fires toward Israel land in Gaza, meaning if Israel's been bombarded by some 2,500 or more missiles, means some 800 missiles fired by Hamas have landed in Gaza. They're killing people. They're killing their own people in Gaza, which of course they just add those numbers to what they claim Israel's killing. So when you hear about all these children being killed, nobody wants children. I shouldn't say nobody. Israel doesn't want children being killed. It's the last thing Israel wants. Hamas loves children being killed, whether they're Jewish children or Arab children, because either way it works for them. So the fact that 1/3 of their rockets land inside Gaza and kill their own people is just another feather in their cap. It all works for them. In the meantime, of course, you had these riots and pogroms going on in Israel. I'm just going to read some statistics that were published today by an organization called Yisrael Sheli, My Israel. There were 10 synagogues in Israel which were arson, burned down. 28 mosques in Israel which were filled with rocks and Molotov cocktails in order to attack Jews. There were 22 mosques from which they were directing these pogroms. 12 houses of Jews were burned down. 386 houses of Jews were pillaged, destroyed. 673 houses of Jews were damaged one way or another. 849 cars, Jewish-owned cars, were burned, set on fire. There were 5,018 recorded cases of rock attacks on Jews. And now there were 0 mosques burned down. There were 0 synagogues which were used as storerooms for rocks and Molotov cocktails. There were 0 synagogues from which they were directing a pogrom. There was 1 Arab-owned house which was burnt down. There were 0 Arab houses which were pillaged and robbed. There were 13 Arab houses which were damaged. There were 13 Arab cars which were burned. There were 41 cases of Jews throwing rocks at Arabs who were not involved in the violence. It's hardly any symmetry here, people, which they try to create you read the media, there's conflict. Jews and Arabs are in the streets fighting each other. Jews are in the streets defending their homes. Jews were not going after Arabs. They were defending their homes. I read to you, there were a couple of cases where Jews went after Arabs. That's true, a couple of cases. There were thousands of cases where Arabs were out in the street with murder in their eyes. It's a phenomenon. It's been happening for over 100 years, where the Arab leaders, the Palestinian leaders, if you want to call them leaders, can manipulate their own people to the point where their blood is boiling and they just want to go out and kill Jews. No rhyme nor reason. It always ends up bad for them. But in the meantime, they're killing Jews and destroying Jewish property. This is the land of Israel. This is this Jewish state. It's horrible what's happening here. Horrible. Then you get idiots. John Oliver, the entertainer, who pretends to be a newsman, pretends to be a journalist, pretends to be a sophisticated cosmopolitan human being who has this ridiculous show in which he just rants and raves about whatever he feels like, puts his own spin on whatever, and he comes out and says Israel's guilty of war crimes because we're not fighting fairly, because we got the upper hand. Because Israel, apparently, because we spent millions of dollars in developing the Iron Dome, which shoots down 90% of the missiles being fired in from Gaza. And we spent all this money to defend ourselves from these anticipated attacks. And by the way, by defending ourselves via the Iron Dome, which so much minimizes the Jewish casualties, that it allows our army to respond in a much more precise manner, which in effect minimizes 100-fold the casualties in Gaza. So by having this Iron Dome, which protecting our citizens by instructing our citizens to go into bomb shelters, by having bomb shelters, it's a law. Every house, every building in Israel has to have a bomb shelter. We don't do it for the fun of it. We do it because we want to protect our citizens. Now in Gaza, no bomb shelters. They don't tell us, they don't, it's all good for them. The more dead, the better. So you get this idiot, John Oliver, who says it's not tit for tat. It's not a fair fight. Of course it's not a fair fight. So why are the idiots in Gaza fighting? They're the ones sending over thousands of missiles. They're the ones who began firing on Israel with an ultimatum that Israel has to abandon the Temple Mount, not allow Jews on the Temple Mount. Israel has to abandon Sheikh Jarrah. So Israel's defending itself. Yeah, we have more firepower. Yeah, we want to teach them a lesson so they don't do this again tomorrow and the next day and the next day. Yes, Israel has screwed itself royally over the past 30 years by agreeing to or initiating Oslo, which brought the Palestinian Authority terrorist organization into the land of Israel, by tolerating Hamas. These are Israeli mistakes, no doubt. Of course, the original mistake was in 1967, after liberating Jerusalem and the Temple Mount, turning the keys to the Temple Mount back to the Waqf and trying to prevent Jews from going up to the Temple Mount. That's like the original sin. So Israel has a hand also in its stupid policies of the past. I agree to that. Then you get Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah, took over from Jon Stewart, right? The Daily Show. I don't know what to make of him. He's just totally clueless. I assume that John Oliver and Trevor Noah, basically they're looking at their statistics, who watches them, who their fans are, who their base is, and that's who they're playing to. Jon Stewart's going to, defend Israel. He'll lose most of his followers, right? So Trevor Noah, again, he just says, wow, it's not a fair fight. It's just not a fair fight. Israel's so much more powerful. And so Israel shouldn't be fighting back so hard. Again, Trevor Noah, if Hamas stopped firing missiles into Israel today, it'd be over. So maybe you want to turn your ire to Hamas and say, why are you guys so stupid? Why do you have put such a minimal value, if any value at all, on human life, on any values of decency? Wake up. Wake up. The fact of the matter is that many Western governments are supporting Israel in this battle, even though their populations may not be. They're starting to get it. They're starting to get it. And by the way, relative to the West, where there's pro-Palestinian rallies in Paris and in London and in Germany and in all over the United States, all over in Arab countries, very few, if any, very few. They're not so stupid. Finally, their eyes are starting to open up that these Palestinians, they're fighting a losing battle. There's no justification for what they're doing. It's all based on hatred and the need to justify themselves, because whether it's Hamas or whether it's the Palestinian Authority, they are built on violence, they are built on oppression of their own people, and the only way to maintain that is to attack Israel. And by the way, Hamas is totally under control by Iran. So Iran, who's in bed with the West, right, is behind all this. They tell Hamas what to do. They fund Hamas. They provide. Hamas has been very, very proud of the weaponry that they're using now that came directly from Iran. So, Iran, who professes to hate the West, they're in bed with the West. The West are their supporters. The Arab world, the Sunni world, doesn't like Iran. They hate Iran. It's the West. It's the West who are the ones who funding Iran. Every time the United States, drops a sanction and billions of dollars flow into Iran, those are billions of dollars that go to Iran proxies and terrorist organizations all through the Middle East. Listen, I could go on, and I would really love to go on, but I would like to finish the final couple of minutes with just a few words about the Parashat Nasso. It begins with, again, the more of the counting of the Levites, Leviim, and their particular roles in the tabernacle. And it goes on to the very, very fascinating, unusual idea of the Sota, the woman who's been accused of her husband of being with another man, and then the laws of the Nazarite, takes on a vow. And then, really, what I find to be just the highlight of the entire reading, which is somewhere in the middle. We're on Numbers chapter 6, verse 22. Hashem spoke to Moshe, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons, saying, so shall you bless the children of Israel, saying to them, may Hashem bless you and safeguard you. May Hashem illuminate his countenance for you and be gracious to you. May Hashem lift his countenance to you and establish peace for you. Let them place my name upon the children of Israel, and I shall bless them." This, of course, is the priestly blessing Birkat Kohanim, which is what we all need. We all need this blessing of peace from Hashem. Don't forget it. And then that's followed by the account of the 12 Nasi'im, the 12, today Nasi is translated as president, but the 12 tribal leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel, who each one day after the other, brought gifts to the tabernacle for Hashem as to honor the inauguration of the tabernacle. And we read one after the other. Each tribal leader brings the identical offering. Yet, why doesn't the Torah just say, okay, they all brought the same one, instead of listing one after the other? It takes a lot of verses. It's a lot of words. Because despite the fact that they each brought the same one, each came from each individual tribe, from each individual leader, with their own intention, with their own love for Hashem, with their own love for their people. Individuals united to defend their people, to defend their God, and united in love for Hashem. May God bless us all with peace. Thank you. Temple Talk.